I hope the sound of that concrete work outside isn't too disruptive this morning. You know, I was thinking, 50 years ago, that could have been me outside working, because I did. Sabbath mornings, sometimes, scrambling to get the steel down before the concrete came. But you know, I was reflecting again. I think today is the first time in my pastoral experience that I have ever preached in a church on Sabbath morning and not been at camp. So, you're the first. But you know what? After that many years of being at camp, I have to say I honestly am quite happy to be here and not worried about all the things going on in camp and remembering the rain that came down and the mud that we had to work in and the pumps that didn't work and everything else. So it's nice to be in a warm, comfortable church. I don't know if you recognize the name Calvin Coolidge. He was a president of the United States back in time. I can't remember the exact years that he was president. But for some reason, he had a number of people surrounding him that were called he called them yes men. They did everything that he did. They were what we would call today copycats. When I was growing up, I had a friend up the street, and it seemed like for years he would do everything that I would do. And I called him a copycat. But anyway, Calvin Coolidge had copycats following him, doing everything he did. And he was at a banquet one particular time, and he thought he would get a little bit of revenge because he saw that they were doing everything that he was doing. And as the banquet progressed, he decided he would order a cup of hot milk instead of coffee. And so the copycats all ordered hot milk as well. Then he took that cup of hot milk and he added a bunch more cream to it. They weren't sure what was going on, but they had to follow suit, so they did. They added cream to their hot milk as well. And then he poured some into a saucer, and they poured some into a saucer, and then he lifted it up to his lips and he blew gently over it, and they were getting all red-faced and wondering what's going on here and why did we do this. But they had to do the same thing, so they did. And then he took his saucer and he leaned over his chair and he put it down beside his pet cat. They had no idea what to do with their saucer and their milk and whatever, but I think they learned that copying people sometimes comes with a risk. Now, there's some people that have gone through real extremes. This lady has done everything she possibly can to make herself be like and look like a cat. She is a real copycat. She has had her teeth filed nice and sharp, just like a cat's teeth are filed. She has implanted whiskers and done all kinds of other things, I guess. I'm not sure she has a tail, but anyway, she's a genuine copycat. There's another gal. I think she's from Russia, but she's done everything she can to make herself look like Barbie. I don't know what she looks like today, but there was a time when she looked like Barbie. And of course, there's the inevitable large crowd that want to be like Elvis. Even though Elvis is dead and he's left the building, there are people that want to copy him, sing like him, dress like him, be like him. And people copy others for all kinds of different reasons. Have you ever tried to think you could look like Arnold? Well, there are some that have worked on that too. Now, he doesn't look like that today. But, again, people have gone through two extremes, to copy someone else. Oh, there's a lot of people were following Will and Kate when they were in the high news, but now it's his younger brother and Meghan and Harry. But, you know, again, they want to copy, they want to do everything, they want to wear everything that these celebrities are doing, wearing, and everything else. But I would like to propose to you that we need to be very careful when we do that because things change over time. Trying to make this thing change. There we go. Remember Captain James Kirk? Looked pretty good when he was a young guy, didn't he? Not so good anymore. You know, the wrinkles come along, the hair turns gray, the nice firm belly becomes a pot belly. Now he's doing commercials. I'm not sure if he needs to, but that's what he does. But things change. Our heroes pass from the scene and they're gone. Modern day heroes seldom, if ever, give glory to God. We looked at that text earlier. I want to just focus on it a little bit more. I'm going to read a different translation. I'm starting to use another translation, so sometimes my notes on the screen and other, what I'm reading are a little different, but this passage, this translation says, we're not like Moses. Actually, this is the same anyway. His face was shining, but he covered it to keep the people of Israel from seeing the brightness fade away. And we are transformed, much like the Messiah. Our lives gradually become brighter and more beautiful as God enters our lives and as we become like him. God wants us, if I could dare say it, to be copycats of him, to become like him. Moses copied God to a large extent. In fact, his wife was starting to complain because we know from reading scriptures that the more Moses was in the presence of God, the brighter his face shone. And so when it was time to go to sleep at night, Zipporah was saying to Moses, "Cover up your head, I can't sleep, it's too bright in here. Get under the covers." And the more he was in God's presence, the more he shone like God. We say, "I want to be like Jesus." We even sing that song. What does that mean? What does that mean? How do we copy him? God is looking for new heroes. He's looking for people who desire to be like him, in as far as that's humanly possible. Don't copy Hollywood, Bollywood, or whatever else is out there. Don't copy Kate and Will. Don't copy Tiger Woods. Don't copy what do you say his name? Kawhi Leonard and the $142 million he just got for bouncing a ball and jumping up and down for 4 years. Don't copy them. You'll be disappointed if you do. Now, if you were to set out on a path to copy Jesus, what would that mean? What characteristics, what qualities of Jesus would you like in your own life? What would you be like to be like? Now, we're not talking about physical transformation, but we're talking more about character. Let me just toss a few things your way, and you can probably add to the list. I know you can add to the list, but let me just give you a few of my thoughts. Ways that we can be like Jesus. Here's an interesting one. Jesus had no fear. You ever thought about that? Jesus was not afraid of anything. What are you afraid of? I suppose if we went down the rows, back and forth, everybody would have a different fear. Afraid of getting sick, afraid of cancer, afraid of thunderstorms. My younger brother used to hide in the deepest recess of the house that he could find, the farthest away closet, because he was afraid of thunderstorms. On the other hand, I love thunderstorms. The louder they are, the better. The brighter they are, the better. I love them, but not everybody does. Some people are afraid of small spaces. They don't like to go in elevators. Some people don't like to have somebody sneak up on them. We have a rule in our house. When I come in, I make noise because my wife does not like me to sneak up on her. And if she has something in her hand and I do, I could be in jeopardy. Afraid of Revenue Canada? Well, maybe, perhaps. Trains, airplanes, the police, dogs, black cats. Falling? Making a public speech. Do you know there was a time in my life, back in high school, when I was absolutely beyond belief, beyond description. I can't even use enough words to describe to you how scared I was to stand up every year when we had to make a 3-minute speech. That put more fear into me than I can even describe to you. Now you say, what are you doing there today? Well, I don't know. The Lord had something to do with that. But we're afraid of a lot of things. Two things, two little sentences here. They're both 2 sentences. Fear is unbelief parading in disguise. Got that one? Fear is unbelief parading in disguise. Here's another one, and I like this one better. Fear has big eyes. Fear has big eyes. You know, we're afraid of things that are sometimes imaginary out there. Here's an interesting character, Howard Hughes. At the time he was alive, he was the richest man in the world, but he was absolutely petrified of germs. At least this is toward the latter part of his life. He would lay naked in his bed in a hotel room with all the curtains closed, dark, because he considered that was the best place that was free of germs. He would walk around with Kleenex boxes on his feet for shoes. If he came in contact with anybody who he thought had gotten sick, he would burn his clothes. And yet he was the richest man in the world, and he was absolutely petrified and afraid of germs. I know someone who won't shake hands with people because I guess he's afraid that he might contract something. I've learned not even to put out my hand when I see him. But then we look at Jesus, and he was not afraid. No fear. Wouldn't you like to be like that, to have no fear? He would walk into the temple with hundreds of people around. He wasn't afraid. You know, back then, the outskirts of the temple looked more like this. If you go to the old city of Jerusalem today, most of the old city looks like that. Crowds and crowds of people in little market stalls selling their goods. And the odd time you'll come across a church or a temple or something like that that's sacred. But the rest of it is nothing but marketplace. And Jesus wasn't afraid to go into that marketplace called the temple and chase everybody out. Would you be afraid if you stood up in church here today and chased everybody out? I wouldn't want to even try that. He went up to the religious leaders, and he told them in kind words, I think, or with a good expression in his voice, that they weren't doing things the way they should be doing them. He wasn't afraid to answer questions. You know, sometimes we're afraid to teach a Sabbath school class because they're going to ask some hard questions. Well, yeah, I like to ask hard questions in Sabbath school class, especially when we were studying the book of Revelation. I had lots of hard questions, but I wound up teaching sometimes too. Jesus wasn't afraid to mingle with the rich or the poor. He could go anywhere and be comfortable. It didn't matter what people thought. Are we afraid of what people think about us? You know, I could stand here, thinking, what are the people thinking when I'm up here talking? I'm afraid. Jesus was not afraid. He wasn't afraid to touch a leper. He wasn't afraid to walk on water. He wasn't afraid to face the demon-possessed people. He wasn't afraid to stand before the powerful rulers of the day. He wasn't afraid to stand before the poorest of people. He wasn't afraid. You know, wouldn't it be wonderful to be like that, to have no fear? Take all the fear out of your life. Copy Jesus. Be like him. 1 John 4:18, God is love, and when we take up permanent residence in a life of love, we live in God, and God lives in us. This way, love has the run of the house and becomes at home and mature in us, so that we're free of worry on Judgment Day. Our standing in the world is identical with Christ. That's how you can be free of fear. Another thing. Well, I guess I should have read that, but we'll pass that. Jesus' love was unconditional. He didn't have any favorites. Do you have favorites? Well, we probably do. But his love was unconditional. No matter who they were, no matter what they looked like, no matter if they were crippled or whatever, they could go up to him and he would not reject them. He loved everyone that he saw, and he did not make judgments at a glance. We're prone to do that, aren't we? To make judgments. Let me tell you a story about doing that. It happened at camp meeting. Surprise, surprise. Oh, this was probably close to 20 years ago. My wife and I were walking from our cabin to the main auditorium, and you know that path that goes there. It's not very far. About halfway there, we noticed a young man sitting on the side of that little walkway. And he had long, long hair, and he was kind of disheveled looking. I began to start making judgments. And as we got closer, he stood up to greet us. And I was thinking inside of my head, oh boy, what's going to happen here? What's going on? Who is this guy? What's going on? But as we got closer, I suddenly recognized him as a young boy. He was a young boy at that time when I had actually baptized him in another church in another district. But I was making all kind of judgment calls by what I saw. By the way, he's a pastor in the Alberta Conference today. So you gotta be careful. Jesus was not like that. He was not judgmental because he could see inside, and he knew what is deep down in our hearts and in our minds. One thing about Jesus, the children loved to be around him. He wasn't a gloomy, joyless person. I think the kids had a nickname for Jesus. Do you know what it might have been? Sunshine. Sunshine, because he always had this glowing smile on his face for these little kids, for the children. Someone said, don't believe in a man's Christianity if the children are never to be found playing around his house. Something to think about. Let me tell you about another friend of mine. His name is Larry. The adults today would call him the Candy Man. He was a member of a small church in Saskatchewan. And every Sabbath, he would come to church with candy in his pockets. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing. Some kids react not well to too much sugar, right? But he always had a piece of candy or something for the children. I know some of those children that have grown up and that have got children of their own, and they still speak highly and fondly of him. And all I have to do is say the Candy Man to them, and they know exactly who I'm talking about. Wish I could be like Jesus, loving everyone no matter what. Copy him. Copy him. Unconditional love. Jesus never showed superiority. He didn't get the red carpet treatment like the celebrities do nowadays. And yet here he is, the King of the universe, coming right down to this lowly, miserable world. He gave the example of service. He had the right to be worshiped and adored. But we can almost dare say that he looked upon us, human beings, as an equal. He came to teach, but he also gave an example that we are not to be seekers of power. Not to be lifting ourselves up and flaunting. No, dare I say a pastor? His email address was Dr. So-and-so at Dr. something or other. I can't remember the whole thing, but, titles. God doesn't have any titles. The disciples didn't have any titles. The Son of Man came to serve. Here's an interesting thought. The upper crust is nothing but crumbs held together by their own dough. You got that? I hope that the terminology is understandable. I know some of you come from a different culture, but the upper crust is nothing but crumbs held together by their own dough. God is not a respecter of persons. He wants us to be like him, to copy him. If we want to be copycats, let's copy Jesus. The rich don't come ahead of the poor, nor are the rich despised because they have more. But Jesus, by example, taught that a servant is the greatest. Another thing about Jesus is that he was totally honest. One thing I don't like is dealing with people who aren't honest. Tell you one thing and then do something different. Jesus tells us up front what it's going to cost you to be a disciple. How do you like this? If you follow me, Jesus says, you might end up in jail. He's honest. He says, if you follow me, your brother, your sister, your mother, your father may not want to have anything more to deal with you, and they may kick you out of the house. That's the reality of what can happen. That's not exactly the way that the world gains adherence. People advertise today, if you join this or if you do that, you will get all of these rewards and these benefits, right? Well, Jesus was honest. He was up front. He said there are times when it's not going to be easy. There have been times in history, too, when leaders have offered the same hard fare, we might say, and people followed by the thousands. Now, I'm a history buff, so you'll forgive me for using an illustration here. These are Waffen SS soldiers. For the most part, they were fanatically trained. They were good soldiers. They died for their belief. Maybe if they were lucky, I'm not sure. 1 out of 3 might have come home. But unfortunately, they were fed a diet of hatred and superiority, and they would follow their leader to their death. If thousands can follow people for that, for someone who offers death, why can't we follow and be like Jesus who offers life? That's easier. That's easier. Jesus bore no grudges. I like the saying, holding a grudge is like letting someone live rent-free in your head. You think about that one. Actually, I got a better expression. Where did I write that one down? You might have heard this one. I heard it years ago, and I've loved it ever since. Resentment is a poison pill that we take and hope someone else dies. Well, you think about that. That's what happens when we hold grudges. Jesus did not hold any grudges. No matter how he was slighted, no matter how he was mistreated, he always offered total and unconditional forgiveness. Can we be like Jesus and do the same? I hear lots of horror stories in churches where people sit side by side and they haven't talked to each other for years and years and years because of something that happened a long time ago. I even know of one church. It's in Saskatchewan, so it's far away, but I know there's a lot of us are from Saskatchewan. But back many, many years ago, the Adventist farmers would even burn each other's fields down on occasion. That's terrible to have to say that. But people can be in church and hold grudges. Jesus didn't. Jairus, religious leader, he and his friends had already decided that Jesus was a sinner and a heretic. But now in the Bible, we read about him coming to Jesus because he needs help. His child is sick and dying. Now, Jesus could have said, "Get out of here. You chased me out of church. Why should I go to your house?" God, he could have said, "Get lost." But do you find any stories like that in the Bible about Jesus? No, there are none. Bearing grudges. Another war story. During the Second World War, there was a Czechoslovakian doctor who was working in England, and he was working as a surgeon. And he was summoned to the hospital one time with, well, better back up. His parents he had just received word that his parents had been killed. And right after that, he was summoned to the hospital to operate on a man who found out was a German officer. Now, he was thinking, or could have been thinking to himself, you know, this man could have been the one who was even flying the bomber that killed my parents. This man is hurt so bad that nobody would know if I didn't do something and the man died. After all, there's only a slight chance that he's going to survive anyway. It'd be so easy to just let things go by and the man would be gone, holding a grudge. But the surgeon dressed up and he went into the operating room and he worked on the man for a couple of hours. And when the task was done, he said to his assistant, "I think he will live." Here was a man who could have bore a grudge, but he didn't. What about us? We bearing grudges? Be like Jesus. Don't be like our natural self and bear grudges. There's a fellow by the name of Will Rogers. He was a man who had so many great little sayings. I just love a lot of his things. He said, and this is a picture of the Vatican, by the way, "Rome has more churches than any other city in the world, and less preaching in these churches than any other city in the world. Everybody wants to see where St. Peter is buried, but nobody wants to live like him." Wow. I was there not too long ago, and I saw the crowds of the people coming there just to see that church. But did they want to be like Peter? Be like Jesus? How much better this world would be if we would become imitators of Jesus, if we would copy him. If we could learn by close association and relationship with Jesus to live without fear, to love unconditionally, to set aside all feelings of superiority, to be totally honest at all times, to never bear a grudge should someone innocently or deliberately hurt us. How much easier would life be if we were like Jesus? We sing, "Be like Jesus, this my song, in the home and in the throng. Be like Jesus all day long. I would be like Jesus." Hope that's our prayer this morning as we think on these thoughts, to be like Jesus. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, as we reflect on some of these thoughts, pray that we can reflect upon ourselves, upon our own nature. And Lord, I ask that you will give each one of us a desire to be like you. May we be transformed and changed as you have promised us. May our faces shine. May our hearts be filled with joy. And so, Lord God, I ask that we will take up the challenge this morning to be more and more like you. Amen.